Huge thank you to Into the AM for partnering with the channel. As you can see, I love my Into the AM shirt a lot as I wear it all the time. You can pick up a 3-pack of these awesome graphic tees for $61.95 and save an additional 10% using the link in the description. Once again, thank you to Into the AM, and I'll see you in the video. Hello everyone and welcome back to Jabletop RPG. It's me, Jake, and here's another awesome episode of the Actual Story of Actual Play. Our guest today is the world builder extraordinaire and GM for the Aylwyn Chronicles, AJ from Winter's Tales. Hello!
Hi! Hello! Thanks for having me.
Other side of the globe.
What a time.
Well,
yes,
you know.
I'm from Australia.
Yes, and that's one of the things I wanna actually just jump right into. It's, you know, Australia, pretty much the other side of the globe from Denmark, where I'm from. So I want to know, how is the TTRPG scene over there? Like, how's it go?
Well, so Australia is a massive country. It's basically from going from my city, which is in Western Australia, over to Sydney, which everyone knows about, is the equivalent of going from LA to New York. Like, it's quite a distance. There's just nothing in the middle of the country except desert. But in regards to the TTRPG scene, like, we've got some amazing foundations that are starting to form, but we're not as known, I don't think, in like the TTRPG actual play scene. There's also a scarcity of like female dungeon masters that are doing actual plays as well, which is why I started doing what I was doing.
Right.
But the scene is smaller than you'd think, but so heartwarming and welcoming. Like, there's so many lovely people doing and making content in Australia. And we have Ghostfire Gaming, which is an amazing company that help publish third-party content in D&D, as well as their own content. And they're over in Melbourne. And they have a lovely team over there that are also making content and helping publish things, which is awesome. So I think they're the most known in like the US scene. When people talk about the Australian TTRPG industry, they're like, oh, Ghostfire Gaming.
Awesome.
So it's
growing.
I
mean,
I'm getting there.
That's fantastic. I can definitely recognize the sort of close-knit community aspect. You know, us nerds, we tend to stick together.
We tend to find each other in the ethos.
Absolutely.
In the realms.
Like adventurers, you know, just drawn to each other.
For sure.
I want to jump into something you've said because I think it's really fascinating. You know, I've had some lovely female presenting people on here already on my show, but I haven't actually had the chance to really jump in to how it feels to be a female presenting person in the space of TTRPG and actual play and all of that stuff.
Sure. I think I'm in a really incredibly privileged position where there has been some people fighting for more representation ahead of me. And also we're in a time period where like equality and diversity is a lot more prevalent. Like, if you were to compare it to when D&D first started, 50 years ago, there was a lot more prejudice. There was a lot more bullying in terms of, oh, girls can't play D&D or get involved in the story and stuff, or you can just play our cleric. But I think that those times have changed a lot, and I've only been in the industry for 4 or 5 years, just in the background and sort of building something in Australia, which isn't even at the forefront of like the tabletop industry necessarily. So I've been very privileged in the sense that I haven't had any like negativity towards building what I'm building. In fact, a lot of people are very encouraging of showcasing more female presenting dungeon masters and creatives in the space. I hosted a panel over at GaryCon 2 weeks ago for femme-facing individuals in the TTRPG industry. And we had most of the audience in tears by the end of the panel, just being so overcome with emotion of, this is the future. equality and diversity in TTRPGs and telling stories from different backgrounds and different perspectives, that's what needs to be done. That's the future. So I think that's kind of my perspective of like, I'm just going to keep fighting for more representation, and hopefully I'll continue to not hit any roadblocks or like negativity.
Yeah, fingers
That'll be great.
crossed.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, it only makes sense that in the industry that's all about telling stories, we should have as many perspectives as possible. You know, that
Yeah.
the spice is people's experiences and what makes them.
If we keep telling
them.
the stories from the same perspective, they're all going to be the same.
Exactly.
You know, people's lives, their experiences, their culture, all comes together, and that's what D&D, I think for me especially, is. It's collaborative storytelling.
Yes.
It's not the DM telling the story and other people being involved. The players are part of telling the story, and if you're all the same person or you're all telling the same perspective, then it's not going to be a very complex story. It's going to be very one-sided. So I think that having different people involved and people who can bring different histories and different perspectives into the story, I think it makes it better.
Absolutely agree. It's all about, as you said, collaborative storytelling. You know, I've heard a lot of people say, especially when I was first starting out playing the game, that it's the DM is the storyteller and then the players play their story. And no, not. It's everyone's story. You know, the DM is the
if you want to do that, be a writer.
Yeah, exactly. Write a book.
Write a book.
Which, you know,
because that's gonna be you telling a story. Yeah,
that's what you want to do. Speaking of collaborative storytelling, I've watched a couple episodes of Wielding Chronicles. Great show, highly recommend.
Thank you.
But based off what you just said about sort of the voice acting, the RP, is there a reason that you continue to use Dungeons and Dragons as the sort of tabletop game aspect, or rather than perhaps some of the more story-focused RPG systems that exist or have been developed?
I started with Dungeons and Dragons because it was the most popular, and in order to be seen and showcased, especially coming from Australia as an actual play show, originally I wanted the Chronicles of Aelwyn to be seen by as many people as possible, and so I started with Dungeons and Dragons. But I absolutely adore other TTRPG systems. Like, I love trying new systems out and seeing which ones work. And so I think for the next project, I would probably think about doing a different system, because the system doesn't really matter to me as much as the capacity for telling the story. So we recently did like a Thirsty Sword Lesbians mini-series, and I don't think we used the mechanics at all. We just role-played.
Awesome.
So I think, the structure doesn't really matter too much in terms of the TTRPG that you're playing. It's about utilizing the mechanics or the offers that it gives you to make your story. And so,
for some people, the mechanics are an important aspect of the storytelling. You know, certain GMs and certain players especially feel that the sort of tethers and the boxes that are shaped by the game mechanics are useful tools for storytelling. So it's all about the personal experience.
Yeah, I think that when it comes down to like being a player or telling a story in a group, mechanics are the best way to sort of find neutrality amongst the group and organize the storytelling. Because I think if you were to just put 5 people in a room and say, tell a story, it might be really difficult to do, you know?
Right.
I'm very blessed with my cast members that all of them are actors and they love role-playing. And so there's so many times that we will spend an hour just role-playing and never roll a dice. But then there comes in the other stuff of, when you're battling a creature, like how are you taking that down and what are the rule systems with that? And so I definitely agree with you that, or those GMs that you were mentioning, that the system really, really helps. But I think I tell stories so often that a lot of the time I'm doing it without any mechanics. So
Yes.
I'm not saying that's a good thing, though. That can often be my own downfall. But
Well,
I think
it's all about personal flavor and what your style is. Some people are hard RP, some people are hard game, some people are mixed. It's all about how you and your group tell the story. Speaking
definitely.
of your story and the Chronicles of Aelwyn, I was really fascinated when watching the first couple of episodes of season 1 by this sort of bold choice, I'll say, of you guys doing this sort of amnesia start for the characters and figuring out as you go what they are and what their identities are, both as players and characters and classes and such. I want if you could go into depth a little bit about like what made you choose to go that route. It's such an interesting choice.
I always wanted to tell an amnesia story with the Chronicles of Aelwyn. The mystery of the mystery of the story of what's happening in the background to these characters was the main driving force. And so after 8 rounds of casting to find the group that we started with, I asked them all whether they wanted to build their characters and just act out, like role play the amnesia, or whether they wanted me to create their characters and step into the studio for episode 1 with a blank character sheet. And every single one of them chose to have me create the character, which I was so honored by, because that takes a lot of trust for the players to be like, I hand over everything to you. But it made such a beautiful story because it allowed the players that were more D&D focused and the new players to D&D, they were both on equal footing because none of them knew who they were. None of them knew their classes or their races or what their backstories were. And so they were on equal footing to start with, which also allowed the audience to live the story with the characters. As they found things out, the audience did, which was really fun. And because I homebrewed everything from the Chronicles of Aelwyn, so Aelwyn, none of the things that people experience in it are from this world or any of the D&D modules. That made it that you were just experiencing complete amnesia. Like, the players could look down at their arms and they wouldn't be able to go, oh, I'm a dragonborn. They had to work out like what their race was as well. And I thought that was such a good storytelling tool, to have this whole mystery of the memory loss be the driving factor to like keep the characters together and move the plot along. And it was also really fun. That's why I wanted to do it. I see so many posts now on Reddit or Twitter of people going, oh, I'd love to run an amnesia campaign, and I just send them the link to the Chronicles of Aelwyn. Because it was something that I think a lot of people would love to try, but it's very difficult and you have to have a lot of trust with your group to pull it off.
Oh yeah. I think you guys did a really good job. And I want to dive into a little bit because a question that immediately popped into my mind when I was watching those first episodes was how much were you sort of, I guess allowing is the best word I can come up with at the moment, your players to metagame, because you mentioned, the races are unique so that you can't just look down and see your Dragonborn, but obviously you're still using primarily D&D sort of classes and spells and moves and such. So when the players were discovering that awesome moment in episode 1 when each player was like, am I a paladin, am I a rogue, and we're getting their little gifts and such,
Mhm.
Um, for that and sort of later on, how much were you expecting them to be like, oh, well, I threw a thing, I have Dex, I know I'm a rogue, I'm gonna build
Mm.
off that?
I think none of the players are metagamers. They're very good at just experiencing the story as the character because they were all actors. And so it became an acting challenge to them rather than a D&D game. We did have 2 players who are very knowledgeable about Dungeons and Dragons. Tristan, especially, I think in the first episode and the second episode, was just trying to find ways to roll every single ability check to see what his scores were. But it never affected the game or the story. There was no way to metagame because I had built the character. So, yes, they could have been a rogue, but I could have given them terrible dexterity. Like, they had to figure out what their character was from the get-go. And we did, ahead of time, I got all of the actors to fill out a questionnaire that basically asked them some very basic questions of their character, even if they had memory loss. Like, what does your character have fight or flight mentality when they get into a scary situation? And so they had a very basic understanding of their characters, even with the memory loss, so that when we started, they knew what their accent was going to be, because that affected where I was going to make them from. I got them to choose what their accent was going to be ahead of time. And then this questionnaire to understand, like, okay, well, if someone points a knife at me, I'm going to be the type of person that fights back, even if they didn't have knowledge of who they were, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So it's really interesting to me because, like you said, it requires not only tremendous trust, but also a lot of skill from the players to adapt on the fly to these characters. So that's really interesting, and the fact that you mentioned them being completely made by you is super interesting.
They the players found out very quickly, and I think this also happens when you do have amnesia, is as soon as they would find out a small bit of information, they would latch onto it and make that everything that they knew, like their entire truth.
Yes.
Even if that tiny piece of information that they had was not relevant whatsoever. And I think when you have amnesia and you get like a flashback or a memory of your past, say you're painting, your brain will just tell you, oh, I'm a painter. And you'll fall into this trap of like trying to find your personality and solidifying it as you go. But the players were so good at just experiencing the world as it went, so it never came to a position of they made a contradictory choice, because we were telling the story together. And so when they made a choice as a character, it fed into the backstory, which was amazing. So yeah.
It always felt very organic as a viewer, that it was either, for a bit or genuinely for the story. I'm just thinking back to I hope I have the right person here. Tristan playing the magic bug man.
Yeah.
And the special blood, I'm a special boy bit is so funny.
Yeah.
I was laughing the whole time.
Tristan is a genius. He's very funny. And he played Iggy so well, because Iggy was this character that had a lot of trust issues from the get-go. Like, woke up without memories and immediately thought everyone was trying to kill him, or that he was trying to kill everyone else. And over the story, the development of Iggy was just beautiful, because Tristan is a comedian first and an actor second. He's so funny. But this platform and the amnesia plotline gave him the ability to just be vulnerable and to have this emotional character as well as being funny. And it was just, it was so wonderful to witness.
Yes.
But yeah, everyone was doing a lot of bits in the first couple of episodes that stuck around a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I watched, so what I usually do is I'll watch the first 3 and the last episode of a show.
Oh.
to see sort of how it's developed, and I could recognize a lot of the development that had happened just based off those episodes. It was easy to tell, which is testament to the player quality and yourself as well. World building.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I want to mention something.
My favorite thing to do.
Yes, we can actually jump right into that, and I'll save the other thing for later, because So before Chronicles of Aelwyn started, you had this world building series on your channel, and it's also from Chronicles of Aelwyn clear that you care a lot about world building, and from the Calamity stream and everything. So I just want to pick your brain on what are the most important for you aspects and elements of building a good world either from scratch or maybe from an idea.
That's such an intriguing question. I think a good world building comes down to making it as real as you can, making it authentic to you, because I've said this to a lot of my clients. I do world building coaching for some of our Patreons and people to help get past like blockades in their mind and just world build and have fun with it and coach them through it. And a lot of the people that I work with, I tell them all the time, you could have a waterfall that goes upwards. You could have a yellow sky. It doesn't matter what you build. Like, your creativity could be anything. As long as you make it real in the world, it can be anything you want it to be. You can justify. And no one's gonna argue with you if you say, "Oh, the waterfall goes upwards because of magic," and we're like, "Cool, awesome! Like, you've let us know." Yeah. So I think world building for me is so intrinsically linked with story, because you can't tell a story without an understanding of the world you're telling the story within. I think that a lot of people do get trapped with being focused on one or the other, but I think you need this balance of both in order for it to feel real, so that the story has stakes and the story within the world feels like it would unfold that way.
I see. That's so interesting. So you're saying like, oh, well, the world is a player as well. The world is also an element that evolves alongside the story.
100%.
For sure.
100%.
I'm thinking
because if you have a story that has like a really boring world, or it's just like, we are in a city that's in the hills, then you have nothing to sort of launch off of. Whereas if you said to me that it's an old, decrepit mining town, they've run out of resources and the mob has taken over to control this city, and they have no trade routes in through the mountains anymore. Like, now I'm intrigued. Now I want to go interact with the mob, or I want to go and sabotage the trade routes, or, there's so much more complexity to it and options rather than just a really bland washover location.
Exactly. That's so intriguing. Like, you have to have jump off points, like you said, for the players to interact with. Otherwise, you can't build. It's so interesting. I don't know if you're a anime fan per se, but I'm thinking back to sort of arguably one of the GOATs world building of Ichiro Oda and One Piece, where so many things that don't make any sense, but he says. He just comes up with an explanation, and you go, well, I mean, he said it, so it must be true.
Yeah, exactly. One Piece, I think, because I only recently got into One Piece because of the live action show on Netflix. But when I was watching the live action show, because I watched that before I went back and watched the anime, the world building for that is amazing, because it's different. And so it puts you immediately into the world, and you as the audience want to be involved in the world itself. I think that is what makes a good story, as well as wanting to be part of the world that it's in. Like, we all had that moment as children of wanting to be a student at Hogwarts.
Yes.
We've all wanted to be a Jedi and discover that we can use the Force. So that's not because of the story necessarily, but because of the world that you've built.
Yeah. For sure. I think you can always imagine, and I think people, at least I do this a lot, maybe I'm alone, but I don't think so, of watching a show like both a real quote-unquote show on TV or such, or an actual play, and imagining yourself as like, oh well, what if I was just like an NPC that they interacted with at some point? You know, what would that be like? Or what other parts of the world could potentially exist now that this has been explained, and get your gears grinding and your juices flowing.
Yeah, I think that's the brilliance of world building within storytelling. Like even Dune, massive world building concepts. People put themselves into the mind of those characters because the world feels real. And so that adds to the story, I think.
Yeah.
And so as a world builder, I do both. I'm a world builder and a storyteller. But I've been world building since I can remember having thoughts. And I've been telling stories ever since I've been able to communicate.
Yes.
So it was natural that became what I do with my life and what I strive to make my career. Because it's just, it's so much fun, but also there's so much complexity to it sometimes as well. Like it's a challenge sometimes to make a whole world and then make that whole world make sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very similar in that boat. I used to write stories when I was in like second, third grade of this made up fantasy world that just if I go back now and look at it, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
This world is terrible. Small child, what are you doing? But
I mean, the children have like incredible imaginations sometimes, and the things that they create are insane. And if you tried to take a child's imagination and ideas and make it a real world, it would be fascinating to sort of see what that becomes. But also, I tell this to a lot of people. I get this all the time where someone will tell me that they're writing a novel. And I always ask them, how long have you been writing the novel? How much of the novel have you written? Or are you world building? Because that's also okay. You don't have to publish a novel if you're just enjoying your time world building a place. Because I think a lot of people put pressure on themselves when they enjoy the world building aspect to then publish a novel. And more often than not, someone will tell me, I've been writing it for 5 years. I've written the first couple of chapters. And I'll say, well, you've been world building for 5 years. Because you've done everything else. You just haven't actually written the novel. And sometimes you don't have to.
Sometimes you don't have to, but other times I think doing world building for 5 years allows you to more easily write the novel, because, oh well, I want this or this or this or this to be showcased. And I guess similar to how Tolkien, right? Tolkien, he wrote this giant world for Middle Earth and the language and everything, and he was like, I guess I'll write a story for so that I can show this to people.
I mean, that's also a very interesting thing, because I think that you don't necessarily need to write a novel. Like, you could also write a series of short stories.
For sure.
Or you could publish the setting. I think that a lot of people get really stuck in thinking that they have to turn it into a story. And my question to those kinds of people would be, do you have a story you want to tell? Or do you have a world you want to build? Because I've started a lot of novels in my time where I started the novel because I had a story to tell. And then I built the world for that story. But I think if you're just world building and you're just gonna then say, oh, I'll tell a story within the world. I don't know if that's going to have the same impact. I don't know.
Fair, but how would you? I think it can, but it's very difficult. But how would you? Let's say a young world builder comes up to you and says, "Oh, well, I have this awesome world that I've been meticulously crafting for 5 years. How do I show it to people?" Because sometimes others get bored if you info dump about your made-up world for 5 hours.
Very true.
So, what would you recommend in terms of like showcasing your world building work?
I think there are amazing things these days that you can do to showcase it. You could publish it in a Patreon page for those that would be interested in a world like yours. If it was to do with TTRPGs, then you could, go onto any of those third-party sites where you could publish like a setting and showcase it. It doesn't have to be the story; it could just be the world itself. But I think then I would ask the young world builder asking me this question. I would see if there are small stories that they have to tell, because you could tell a podcast. You could do it in a podcast form, or you could write a collection of short stories. You could make picture books for kids. Like, there's so many different avenues I think you could go down instead of writing a novel, if that is too much to do. Because I think a lot of people put the pressure on themselves to be able to write a novel and write it well, instead of seeing all the other different avenues that you could take.
Awesome. I think that's a great answer. So you were doing these world building guides, and then you launched this huge production actual play.
Yep.
What sort of made, I'm saying as if you were forced, but what inspired you, I say is a better word, to do this? Because you didn't just start a small podcast. It's a pretty involved production you've got going.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Why, I guess, is the simple question.
Oh, well, that's kind of easy. When I first started doing work within the TTRPG space, and this is long before the YouTube channel even started, I was not seeing any female dungeon masters in the space. I was seeing maybe one or two occasionally, but every big actual play, this was before the Summer of Abria, I was never seeing a female dungeon master at the forefront. And so I got together this group of other female-facing players in a video call, and I asked them, hey, I want to do streaming, or I want to make content. What do you want to see in the space as female players? And all of them told me, we want to see a female dungeon master at the forefront. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to do that, because I want to tell stories and I enjoy being a dungeon master and I love actual plays. But I'm not going to half-ass it. I'm going to build a studio, and I'm going to construct a world and get people excited about the world ahead of time, and then I'm going to launch this actual play. And so I set up a 2-year plan, I think, where I started guest starring on channels as a player and build a name for myself. And then I started launching my YouTube channel with the World Builder series to showcase the world that was being built for this show, whilst I was putting the money together and building the studio.
Damn.
Yeah. And then I had to move house, I think the month that we were meant to launch the show. And so I had to move everything and then go back to the studio and set up the studio with the set, all the props and everything, within the space of a month. Okay. And then I launched the show, because I wanted to showcase more female DMs, but also showcase what Australia can do. I wasn't seeing anything coming out of Australia at all We had live streamers who were doing actual plays, but there wasn't a studio space. There wasn't an actual play that I could think of. When I think of, America, you've got Critical Role, obviously, and Dimension 20, but then even like High Rollers in the UK. People had these shows, these studios spaces that they were using. And luckily, I was in a position that I could do that and build the studio, and ended up building and starting the first Dungeons and Dragons studio in Australia, which is crazy to
And
say
awesome.
out loud. Thank you. Just because I wanted to. I guess that's the simple answer. I wanted to.
Because who needs a better reason than that, really?
Yeah.
So
I wanted to showcase people.
yeah, and I mean, I think you did a great job. I was definitely surprised pleasantly when I tuned in to watch and saw the props, the studio, everything, the special effects, animations, everything. Really, really well done. Everyone go check
Thank you.
out.
It's been a lot of fun. It's been a wild journey for the last 2 and a bit years now.
Yeah. Do you have any sort of rounding out this talk? It's been a really good time talking to you. Do you have any sort of favorite moments you can share from not just the actual play, but sort of this whole 2-year journey of doing this?
I am always surprised every time I look back on what I've been recently doing. I'm always overwhelmed with this feeling of moving both too fast and too slow at the same time. But I've been able to go to so many amazing conventions in the last 2 years and meet a lot of amazing people and work with a lot of amazing people in such a short span of time. It's honestly insane. The 48-hour calamity that we ran for our 2-year Twitch anniversary in December had over 48 content creators involved to make that happen, and who signed on because of a cool idea and because we wanted to do it, because we wanted to. And now I am putting together the next big event, and I've had over 100 people message me in the last couple of days since I released the idea for it. And that's amazing to me. I just want to tell stories with so many people and continue to grow the company so that I can make more content. I've got so many different ideas and shows I want to run. And I said at the panel at GaryCon, my next goal, or my goal for Winter's Tales, is to basically become the Dropout of Australia.
Let's go.
Yeah, I want to make shows. I want to produce big budget, a cooking show, or go learn how to become a ranger and go do archery lessons or whatnot, So I've got so many things I want to do, but I'm just grateful that I'm where I'm at right now, because it feels like it has happened in no time at all, that I'm attending GaryCon as a notable industry member and, hanging out with some people in the industry that I never thought would be possible, because I just strived to make a studio and tell stories.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I mean, I think it's incredible, really, really inspiring sort of tale of you can do whatever you set your mind to.
Yeah, if you're as crazy and determined as me, you could do anything you want to do.
You just gotta be really dedicated.
Yeah, I think it's just about setting your intention or having a goal and pursuing it. But pursuing it to the end, to the end of that idea.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And sometimes you end up in crazy situations.
Oh boy, yes you do.
All right, final question that I'll end off on.
Okay.
If you were isekai'd, if you were transported away from this world into the D&D world, the classic Forgotten Realms, what race and class would you be?
Ooh. I think I would be an elven druid, which is very contradictory to who I am as human AJ. But I've always played more towards the druidic nature with like shape changing, becoming an animal. And again, this is very contradictory to me, who's not a nature person at all. But I think that would be what I would become because it would be really fun.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. I want to be a bear.
I mean, in reality, who doesn't? It's amazing.
Yeah. If you could transform into a bear, why would you not do that?
Why would you not? Amazing. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, AJ, for coming on and talking with me on the show today. Really
Thanks
appreciate
for having
it.
me. It's been so much fun.
Awesome. Well, that's everything for our show today. Remember to support our guest and subscribe and keep tuned for more TTRPG content. Until then, keep telling stories.